I was abandoned 5 days after I was born. But for some reason, my biological mother left me on the doorstep of a local criminal organization in Ravenwood City to survive. Even while still in my swaddling clothes, I instinctively cried, "Dad," when a group of hardened criminals glared down at me. The rough men instantly frowned. Maybe we should keep this kid. From then on, I gained 108 dads. Our home was truly a den of outlaws. Every single one of them was on the most wanted list. So to avoid causing trouble for my dads, I lived a low-key life for over a decade. That was until high school when I encountered school bullying. Tiffany, the queen bee, and her cronies cornered me in the restroom, splashing me with cold water, tearing my clothes and even filming me with her phone. Why? Why are you staring? You scholarship student. How dare you glare at me? But they hit me so hard that I grabbed her, and we fell from the 3rd floor. When I woke up, the teacher in the nurse's office was scolding me. She hit you. So you tried to kill her. Is that it? You're absolutely vicious. Call your parents immediately. I want to see how your parents raised you. My hair stood on end. I meekly asked, "Miss Davison, are you sure you want to call my parents?" As soon as the words left my mouth, a sharp slap echoed. Mr. Albright, Tiffany's father, struck me across the face, his eyes burning with menacing fury. "You brat. You will call your parents to apologize to me." I was instantly knocked to the ground, half my face throbbing with pain. Miss Davison, however, acted as if she hadn't seen a thing. She immediately fawned over Mr. Albright, nodding and bowing. "Mr. Albright, please rest assured. The school will handle this very seriously and show no leniency." She turned to me, yelling directly into my face, "Stella, look what you've done to Tiffany. Call your parents right away to pay for her medical expenses." I hung my head, my nails digging deep into my palms. A metallic taste of blood spread in my mouth. No. It was Tiffany. She was the one who first cornered me in the restroom, splashed me with cold water and tore my clothes. But I couldn't finish my sentence. Tiffany started to cry weakly from her hospital bed. "Dad. He's lying. I was just passing by." And Stella suddenly went crazy and pushed me down the stairs. "She's just a scholarship student. Jealous that our family has money. She's always hated me." "It was clearly you," I immediately retorted. But Miss Davison didn't give me a chance to speak. "Shut up, Stella. The facts are clear. You deliberately hurt her." She grabbed me and dragged me out of the medical room, roughly pulling out my phone. Miss Davison slapped it against my face. "I don't want to hear your nonsense now. Immediately call your parents. Tell them to get over here and pay up." Suddenly, the gaze of various teachers and students in the hallway focused on me. A mix of curiosity and shock and freude. But I clutched the cold phone, staring at the bustling contact list. Yet I couldn't bring myself to make the call. I had 108 dads. But Dad 1 was a syndicate boss. Dad 3 smuggled weapons. Dad 15 lent out high-interest loans. And Dad 78 ran an illegal casino. Though they always loved to give me black cards and then pat my head, saying, "Stella, don't stir up trouble out there. But if anything happens, always come to us. If anyone lays a finger on you, Dad 1 will make their whole family disappear from the face of the earth. Right? Anyone who dares to make you suffer, Dad 3 will come for them with a pair of knives." But they were all Ravenwood City's most wanted criminals. A shiver ran through me. I remembered them always leaving early and coming home late, their bodies covered in knife scars and the smell of blood, grumbling about running into the cops again that day. I remembered the news channels, constantly featuring their wanted posters. I couldn't risk putting them in danger. Looking up again, I tried one last struggle. "Miss Davison, My dad's. They're all working out of town. Very far away. They can't come. Could we? I'll write an apology. I'll apologize publicly. I'll accept a disciplinary record. Anything. Just please don't call them. Okay. Miss Davison let out a sneer. Working out of town. No wonder you turned out to be such a shameless child. And they can't come. Tiffany's medical exams. Her emotional distress. Compensation. That's a lot of money. Can a kid like you pay for it? Call them quickly. Don't waste my time. She looked at me with utter contempt. How much money I can? I was about to say. I could pay for it myself. As my dad's had given me black cards I hadn't even touched. But Mr. Albright emerged. And immediately handed Miss Davison a bank card. Miss Davison. Here's 50,000. It's a donation for the school. My demand is simple. Get her parents here to compensate us and admit guilt. Otherwise, I'll just call the police. I'll charge her with aggravated assault. Once she has a criminal record, she can forget about ever going to college. Upon seeing the bank card, Miss Davison's eyes instantly lit up. She turned to me, her tone becoming incredibly stern. Stella. Did you hear that? This is your last chance. Either call your working-class parents now to pay and apologize. Or get a criminal record. And forget about ever going to college for the rest of your life. Criminal record. Those two words felt like needles piercing my mind. I couldn't have a criminal record. I still wanted to go to college to earn money. And support my dads in their old age. Looking at that bank card. Looking at Miss Davison's snobbish, ugly face. Tears instantly welled up in my eyes. Trembling fingers finally lit up my phone screen. Miss Davidson. Please don't. Don't call the police. I'll call my parents. My hand trembled as I tapped Dad one at the top of my contacts. Although he was a syndicate boss, he was still the most normal among all my dads. I hoped he could pretend to be an ordinary person and get through this. Beep beep. The call was answered. The moment it went through, Dad one's warm, smiling voice came from the receiver. Stella. Dad one. I said, pressing my lips together. The teacher wants me to ask you to come to school. I go to school. He instantly sounded excited. Oh. Is my daughter winning another award? This is the first time you've asked me to come get a certificate. Wait up. I'm coming now. No. A pang of sadness hit me. I was about to say no. But then, a clear gunshot suddenly rang out from the other end of the line, followed by a strange man's scream and a series of dull thuds. I frozen instantly. I faintly heard a very soft clean it up. Childhood memories flooded back. Dad one always came home with blood on him. But he would lie and say it was ketchup. His breathing seemed a little unsteady. But when he spoke to me again, his voice was still gentle. Know what? Sweetie. Thinking about whether he was doing something dangerous. Whether he was hurt. My heart pounded. The words on the tip of my tongue hardened into no. Nothing. It's fine. I can get the award myself. You're busy. I'm hanging up. Hey. You didn't even say anything. Why are you hanging up? Hearing this, Miss Davidson shouted and reached for my phone. I instinctively dodged, quickly ending the call. But the next second slap. Another harsh slap landed on my face. Miss Davison's face was distorted with rage. You've caused such big trouble. And you're still trying to hide it from your parents. Mr. Albright slammed his hand against the wall, pointing at my nose and yelling. Don't think you're getting away with this by hiding it from adults. I'm telling you. In this part of Ravenwood City, I'm the local big shot. I have connections at the police department. If you dare touch my daughter, I'll make your whole family of working-class nobodies disappear. In a minute. Tiffany limped out mocking me. You're so pathetic you don't even dare call your parents. I bet your family is too poor to put food on the table. Right? So where did you get the guts to push me? So ridiculous. I lowered my head. My voice as faint as a mosquito's hum. My dad's really can't come. I'm sorry. Tiffany. It was my fault. I shouldn't have pushed you. I can bow down and apologize to you in front of the whole school. Be your errand girl for a year. Or you can hit me back. Just please don't call the police. Okay. I don't want to get expelled. Tiffany scoffed contemptuously. But Mr. Albright roared and reached for my phone. You're trying to negotiate now. Give me your parents' number. I'll talk to them myself. Miss Davison immediately chimed in. Stella. Give Mr. Albright your phone to call. Don't resist. You need to show an attitude of wanting to solve the problem. The man lunged forward to snatch it. But I clung to my phone, backing away repeatedly. Finally, I stumbled and fell awkwardly to my knees. My knees hit the cold tile floor, making tears stream down my face from the pain. But I kept bowing, begging. Please. Please don't involve my dads. Tiffany. Please. I'll do all the apologizing and making amends. I just mentioned you can hit me back. Just please don't call my parents. Okay. Dull thuds echoed on the floor as I bowed repeatedly, until blood smeared my forehead. Only then did a look of triumphant pleasure appear on Tiffany's face. Stopping her dad, she raised her voice. All right. Then just apologizing in public isn't enough. Tomorrow you'll have to bow 100 times, touching your forehead to the ground until I'm satisfied. Only then will I not call the police. Okay. Clenching my fists, I agreed to all her conditions. My heart bled with humiliation, but I felt it was worth it as long as my dads weren't implicated. But that evening, when I returned to the small apartment Dad too rented for me, wearing a baseball cap and feeling exhausted, I saw 3 men bustling around in the kitchen cooking. It was Dad 66, Dad 79 and Dad 93. Seeing me return, they immediately gathered around me happily. Stella's home. At the dining table, Dad 66 smiled and pinched my cheeks. Bella. I heard you're getting an award at school. Why didn't you let one of us go get it for you? By my calculations, it should be my turn. Right? Dad 79 skillfully massaged my shoulders, refuting him nonsense. It's my turn. Dad 93 pushed a bowl of soup in front of me. Drink. Think up. It's good for your brain. You'll get into a great college. My nose stung and I almost cried. But I forced a smile and explained it's just a small award. No need to trouble yourselves. I'll call you for the big awards next time. All right. We won't argue. You eat first. Sweetie. They excitedly served me food. As I was eating, Dad 66 suddenly looked serious and answered a phone call. I faintly heard a few words. Shipment being watched again. Jumped into the river. Damn. This money is really hard to earn. Instantly, my heart tightened again, fearing they would be arrested. I took a deep breath and put down my fork. Down ads, could you in the future stop doing that kind of work? I'm grown up now. I'll get into a good college and support you. So could you get some stable jobs? The 3 big men froze simultaneously. Then, overcome with emotion, they hugged each other and cried, promising they would. 2 hours later, the 3 of them gave me a few more instructions, left me 3 black cards and then left in a hurry. I stood at the door watching them disappear down the hallway, my eyes stinging. Remember to change jobs. We know. But the moment the door closed, Dad 66 looked at his brothers beside him, puzzled. Strange. Our daughter doesn't like my nuclear submarine development. The other 2 also looked bewildered. And as I closed the door, I looked at them. My family. 108 group chat on my phone. The messages were already $9.99 plus. My dads were all asking, "Is Stella tired from studying today? Do you have enough money? Don't skimp." "I have plenty of money." My eyes welled up again. I sniffed and finally typed a line in the chat box. "I'm fine. Everyone. Don't worry. Dads. You're busy with work. Please also pay attention to safety. Send the next second." Staring at the constantly popping up messages of concern on the screen, I made up my mind. I would never cause my dads any more trouble. "Stella. You must hold on. Everything will be fine after the SAT." The pale morning light filtered through the thin curtains of my small apartment, casting long and desolate shadows across the worn wooden floor. I stared blankly at the ceiling, my entire body feeling as heavy as lead, while the dull throbbing in my forehead reminded me of the humiliating promise I had made yesterday. Today was the day I had to kneel before the entire school and bow 100 times to Tiffany Albright. I slowly pulled myself out of bed, my joints aching in protest, and walked over to the cracked bathroom mirror. A stark purple bruise marred my forehead, a glaring testament to my desperate pleas on the cold tile floor of the nurse's office. I carefully applied a thick layer of concealer over the dark marks, hoping to hide the evidence of my misery from the world. And more importantly, from my fiercely protective dads. If Dad 3 ever saw this bruise, he would undoubtedly grab his twin blades and tear Ravenwood City apart looking for the culprit. If Dad 1 knew I had been forced to bleed just to protect them, he would orchestrate a bloodbath that would place him at the very top of every international most wanted list. I could never let that happen, because they were the only family I had ever known. The rough and terrifying men who had awkwardly but lovingly raised a discarded infant. I slipped into my faded school uniform, ensuring the collar was pulled up high enough to hide the scratches Tiffany had left on my neck during her unprovoked assault in the restroom. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my worn backpack and stepped out into the crisp morning air, steeling my heart for the ordeal that awaited me at Ravenwood High. The walk to school felt like a death march, every step echoing with the crushing weight of my impending humiliation. When I finally arrived at the imposing iron gates of the campus, the usual bustling energy of the student body suddenly ground to a halt. Whispers erupted like a contagious disease, spreading through the courtyard as hundreds of eyes turned to stare at me with a sickening mixture of pity and malicious glee. I kept my head down, my fingers tightly gripping the straps of my backpack until my knuckles turned completely white. Miss Davison was already standing at the entrance of the main auditorium, her arms crossed tightly over her chest and a smug, impatient sneer plastered across her heavily powdered face. "You are late, Stella." She barked out the words with venomous authority, clearly relishing the power she held over my future. "Mr. Albright and Tiffany are already waiting inside, and they have graciously agreed to let the entire senior class witness your sincere apology." My stomach violently churned at her words. The entire senior class. They had turned my desperate plea for mercy into a public spectacle, a theatrical execution of my dignity. I nodded mutely, biting the inside of my cheek so hard that the familiar metallic taste of blood flooded my mouth once again. As I pushed open the heavy double doors of the auditorium, the blinding glare of the stage spotlights hit my eyes, making me instinctively flinch. The massive room was packed to the brim with students, their murmurs creating a deafening hum that felt like a swarm of angry bees buzzing inside my skull. In the very center of the polished wooden stage sat Tiffany, lounging in a velvet guest chair like a victorious queen on her throne. Her ankle was wrapped in a pristine white bandage, a completely unnecessary prop for an injury she had entirely faked. Standing right beside her was her father, Mr. Albright, looking impeccably dressed in a tailored Italian suit that screamed of arrogant wealth and untouchable local power. "Get up here, you worthless brat." Mr. Albright's voice boomed through the auditorium's sound system, the microphone amplifying his absolute contempt for me. The whispers of the crowd instantly died down, replaced by an eerie, expectant silence. I slowly climbed the wooden steps to the stage, my legs trembling so violently that I thought I might collapse before I even reached the center. Miss Davison hurried up the stairs behind me, roughly shoving me forward by the shoulder. "Don't dawdle, Stella. Show Mr. Albright and his poor daughter the respect they deserve. I stumbled forward, barely catching my balance before I stopped a few feet away from Tiffany's arrogant, smiling face. She leaned forward, her perfectly manicured fingers resting lightly on her chin, as she looked down at me with glittering, venomous eyes. I am waiting. Scholarship student. She practically purred the words into the microphone her father handed her. You promised me 100 bows. And I want to hear your forehead hit the floor every single time. A few cruel chuckles echoed from the front row, mostly coming from Tiffany's wealthy sycophants, who had helped her corner me in the restroom yesterday. I squeezed my eyes shut, pushing away the overwhelming wave of injustice and rage that threatened to consume me. This is for my dads, I repeated silently in my mind like a sacred mantra. I cannot let them get arrested. I cannot let them go to prison. I must protect them just as they have always protected me. Slowly, agonizingly, I bent my knees. The cold, hard wood of the stage met my skin as I knelt before the girl who had tormented me for months. I placed my hands flat on the floor, bracing myself for the ultimate surrender of my pride. But miles away, in the luxurious penthouse of a towering skyscraper that overlooked the entire sprawling metropolis of Ravenwood City, a completely different scene was unfolding. Arthur, known to the world's absolute elite as the untouchable head of the Global Intelligence and Security Syndicate Aegis, sat behind a massive mahogany desk. His impeccably tailored charcoal suit bore no trace of the violent operation he had personally overseen the previous afternoon. To the criminal underworld, he was a terrifying phantom, a kingmaker who could topple governments with a single phone call. To Stella, he was simply Dad 1. The man who brought home ketchup-stained shirts and always smelled faintly of expensive cigars and danger. Arthur was staring at his encrypted smartphone, his usually cold and calculating eyes clouded with a rare, unsettling anxiety. He replayed the brief, aborted phone call from his daughter over and over again in his mind. Stella had said something about a teacher, about coming to school. And then she had abruptly changed her mind after hearing the background noise of his operation. She had sounded utterly terrified, her sweet voice trembling with a suppressed panic that Arthur's highly trained ears had finally recognized in the calm light of the morning. Something is wrong, Arthur muttered to himself, his deep voice carrying a lethal edge that made the temperature in the spacious office seemingly drop 10 degrees. The heavy mahogany doors of the office suddenly swung open, and Blade, known to Stella as Dad 3, strode into the room. Blade was a legendary shadow operative and arguably the most lethal bladed weapons master on the planet, though Stella believed he was just a petty weapons smuggler constantly fleeing the police. Arthur, what is the matter with our little girl? Blade asked, his sharp, hawk-like eyes narrowing as he casually tossed a highly classified espionage dossier onto the glass coffee table. She left for school this morning looking like she was walking to her own funeral. Professor, also known as Dad 66, walked in right behind Blade, furiously tapping on a state-of-the-art holographic tablet. I noticed it too, the professor said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. A man whose brilliant mind pioneered next-generation nuclear propulsion systems for the world's most advanced navies. Her heart rate monitor, which I subtly installed in her smart watch, spiked significantly yesterday afternoon and remained dangerously elevated all night. Arthur stood up, his towering frame radiating a sudden, overwhelming aura of absolute authority and boundless paternal fury. She called me yesterday while I was clearing out the cartel nuisance on the docks, Arthur said, his jaw clenching so tightly that the muscles fluttered visibly beneath his skin. She asked me to come to her school, claiming it was for an award. But she sounded deeply distressed and hung up abruptly. The professor's fingers flew across his holographic keyboard at lightning speed, effortlessly bypassing the pathetic firewalls of Ravenwood High School's administrative servers. Give me 3 seconds, the professor murmured, his eyes reflecting the rapid stream of digital data scrolling across his screen. I am accessing the school's internal security camera network and the principal's private communication logs right now. The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence as the 2 other deadly men waited for the verdict. Arthur slowly reached for his suit jacket, an ominous calm settling over him that terrified even his closest brothers in arms. Got it. The professor's voice suddenly cracked. A rare sound for a man completely devoid of standard emotional responses. His face drained of all color as he projected the live security feed onto the massive wall monitor of the penthouse office. Arthur and Blade turned to look at the screen. And the air in the room instantly crystallized into pure, unadulterated murder. On the massive high-definition display, their precious daughter, the girl they had sworn to protect with all their immense power and boundless wealth, was kneeling on a wooden stage. A spoiled, sneering teenager was holding a microphone, demanding that their Stella bow her head to the floor 100 times. Beside the arrogant teenager stood an overweight man in a cheap designer suit, looking down at Stella with absolute disdain. The security feed had no audio, but the visual was more than enough to ignite a firestorm of apocalyptic proportions within the hearts of the three men. "Who is that man?" Arthur asked, his voice entirely devoid of inflection, which was the ultimate warning sign that a catastrophic event was about to occur. The professor quickly brought up a side window with the man's complete personal and financial history. "His name is Robert Albright, a local real estate developer with a net worth of roughly $30 million. The professor reported, his own voice dripping with venom. "He fancies himself a powerful figure in this district and regularly bribes the school administration to ensure his daughter receives preferential treatment." Blade let out a low, dark laugh that sounded like metal scraping against stone. $30 million. Blade whispered, slowly drawing a gleaming, custom-forged karambit knife from his sleeve and twirling it with lethal grace. "I spend more than that on my annual supply of custom whetstones." Arthur picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over a single emergency broadcast icon that connected directly to the private network of all 108 fathers. "Protocol Omega," Arthur commanded, his voice echoing through the penthouse like the inevitable tolling of a death knell. "Mobilize everyone currently in the city." The professor nodded grimly, immediately overriding all active global operations and sending the priority 1 alert to the remaining 105 men. Within seconds, a chorus of furious confirmations flooded the encrypted channel from across Ravenwood City and beyond. The syndicate boss, the weapons master, the casino mogul, the brilliant scientist, the elite medical surgeon, the financial tycoon. All of them dropped whatever empire-shaking business they were handling. "We are going to school," Arthur said softly, straightening his tie with eerie precision. "And Mr. Albright is going to learn exactly what happens when you threaten the daughter of the Aegis Collective." Back in the suffocating heat of the school auditorium, I had completely surrendered myself to the abyss of public degradation. I lowered my head, my eyes firmly shut, and allowed my forehead to forcefully strike the hard wooden floor. "1," I whispered, the sound barely audible over the sudden, cruel applause that erupted from Tiffany's inner circle in the front row. "Louder," Mr. Albright barked, stepping closer to me so that his polished leather shoes were mere inches from my trembling hands. "If you do not say it so everyone can hear your pathetic voice, it does not count." Miss Davison rushed forward, snatching the microphone from Tiffany and shoving it aggressively toward my face. "Speak into the mic, Stella, and show some genuine remorse for your vicious, unprovoked attack." I choked back a sob, the sheer injustice of the situation threatening to shatter my mind into a million irreparable pieces. It was a lie. All of it was a disgusting lie. But I was entirely powerless to fight against their money and their connections. I raised my upper body slightly, taking a shuddering breath before throwing myself forward again. 2. I said into the microphone, my voice echoing miserably through the silent, captivated auditorium. Tiffany let out a delighted, high-pitched giggle that made my stomach churn with physical nausea. "This is fantastic," Tiffany sneered, pulling out her latest model smartphone and pointing the camera directly at my humiliated form. "Keep going, scholarship girl. My followers are going to absolutely love this live stream." I ignored her, drowning out the world and focusing entirely on the image of my dad smiling and cooking me dinner the night before. 3. I slammed my head down again, the lingering pain from yesterday's bruise flaring up and sending a sharp, blinding spike of agony behind my eyes. 4. The dull thud of my flesh hitting the wood became a rhythmic, hypnotic drumbeat of my own destruction. 5. Mr. Albright smirked, casually adjusting the gold Rolex on his thick wrist as he addressed the captive audience of high school students. Let this be a lesson to all of you about the natural hierarchy of society, he announced loudly. His chest puffed out with the arrogance of a man who believed he was utterly invincible. People like this girl come from nothing, raised by useless, working-class degenerates who cannot even afford to show their faces today. My breathing hitched, and my hands curled into tight, shaking fists against the floorboards. They have no breeding, no manners, and no future, he continued, pacing back and forth across the stage while I remained kneeling in the dust at his feet. When trash like her tries to step out of line and harm my precious daughter, I make sure they are crushed so completely that they never dare to look up again. 6. I whispered, my tears finally breaking free and splashing silently onto the polished wood. Don't you dare talk about my family, I screamed internally, my heart bleeding for the men who loved me more than anything in the world. 7. Miss Davison beamed at Mr. Albright, completely abandoning any pretense of being an impartial educator. You are entirely right, Mr. Albright, she simpered, her eyes practically turning into dollar signs as she likely calculated the next generous donation he would drop into her bank account. This school only maintains its prestige because of distinguished families like yours, and we must weed out the lower-class elements that poison our academic environment. 8. I prepared to strike my head against the floor again, my vision beginning to blur from the sheer emotional and physical exhaustion. But just as my forehead was about to touch the wood for the 9th time, an unearthly, deafening roar shook the very foundations of the auditorium. The entire building seemed to violently tremble as an overwhelming, rhythmic thumping noise descended directly onto the roof of the school. It sounded like the apocalyptic beating of monstrous wings, rattling the tall glass windows and sending a shockwave of panic through the seated students. What on earth is that noise? Mr. Albright demanded, his arrogant speech momentarily derailed as he looked up nervously at the ceiling. Before anyone could answer, the heavy double doors at the back of the massive auditorium did not just open. They were violently blown off their steel hinges. The massive wooden doors crashed into the tiled hallway with the force of an explosion, sending a cloud of dust and debris billowing into the air. Screams erupted from the terrified students as they scrambled out of their seats, instinctively backing away from the terrifying entrance. Through the settling dust, a completely chilling and awe-inspiring procession began to march into the room. Dozens of men, all dressed in immaculate, pitch-black tactical suits and expensive dark coats, stepped into the auditorium with the synchronized, lethal grace of an elite military unit. The temperature in the room plummeted instantly, replaced by an overwhelming aura of pure, suffocating danger that paralyzed every single person present. At the very front of the terrifying vanguard walked a man whose mere presence commanded absolute, unquestionable obedience. It was Dad 1. Arthur strode down the center aisle, his incredibly sharp, aristocratic features set in a mask of terrifying, frozen rage. His dark eyes, usually so warm and crinkling with laughter when he looked at me, were currently swirling with the cold, merciless promise of imminent death. Flanking him closely on the right was Blade, his hands casually resting in the pockets of his sleek leather jacket, though his eyes darted around the room, instantly identifying every possible threat and exit. On Arthur's left was the professor, his tablet in hand, calmly adjusting his glasses with a chilling, clinical detachment. Behind them followed Dad 15, the ruthless financial titan whose brilliant manipulation of global markets could bankrupt entire nations, looking utterly furious. And Dad 78, the underground casino emperor who held the darkest secrets of politicians and celebrities in his iron grasp, cracking his knuckles with a sickening crunch. And dozens more. All the men I had grown up hiding from the world, suddenly stepping into the harsh, unforgiving light of day. My mind went completely blank. the overwhelming shock freezing my tears halfway down my cheeks. No. I gasped softly. My worst nightmare coming to life right before my eyes. They had come. They had actually come. And now they were going to be arrested. Exposed. And taken away from me forever. Who do you think you are? Mr. Albright shouted. His voice cracking slightly as the primal fear began to seep through his arrogant facade. You cannot just barge into a private school event like a gang of thugs. Arthur completely ignored the sweating. Pathetic man. His piercing gaze locking solely onto my kneeling, trembling form on the stage. The entire sea of terrified students frantically parted before him, pressing themselves against the walls to avoid touching the terrifying men who radiated lethal intent. Arthur walked up the wooden stairs of the stage, his polished shoes making completely silent, predatory steps. He bypassed Mr. Albright as if the men were nothing more than a minor speck of annoying dirt on the floor. He walked straight toward me. And slowly, gently, dropped to one knee. Stella. Arthur whispered. His deep, resonant voice suddenly cracking with a profound, overwhelming ocean of sorrow and guilt. He reached out with a large, warm hand, his fingers trembling ever so slightly as he gently brushed the stray hair away from my bruised and battered forehead. My little star. What have they done to you? I flinched away, completely terrified for him, my eyes darting frantically toward the school entrance to see if the police were already swarming the building. Dad. You have to leave. I whispered frantically, grabbing the perfectly tailored sleeve of his expensive suit and trying to push him away. You cannot be here. They will call the police. They will see your face. You have to run before they catch you. Arthur's expression shattered, a look of profound confusion mixing with the raw, agonizing pain of a father seeing his child in distress. Catch me, he murmured softly, completely bewildered by my panicked reaction. Sweetheart. Nobody in this world can catch me. And nobody is ever going to hurt you again. Mr. Albright, having finally recovered a shred of his pathetic courage, stomped toward us, his face turning an ugly, mottled shade of crimson. Are you the worthless parents of this little delinquent? Mr. Albright bellowed, pointing a chubby, diamond-ringed finger directly at Arthur's face. I should have known you would look like a bunch of uneducated mafia rejects. Blade moved so fast that the human eye could barely track his motion. In a fraction of a second, Blade was standing directly in front of Mr. Albright, one hand effortlessly grasping the man's outstretched finger. With a sickening, incredibly sharp crack, Blade bent the finger completely backward. Mr. Albright let out a high-pitched, agonizing squeal that echoed grotesquely through the silent auditorium, his knees buckling instantly as he collapsed to the floor in overwhelming pain. Do not point at him, Blade stated calmly, his voice devoid of any emotion, as if he were simply commenting on the weather. And do not ever speak to our daughter in that tone of voice again, unless you want to spend the rest of your painfully short life breathing through a highly specialized synthetic tube. Tiffany shrieked in absolute horror, dropping her phone to the floor as she watched her supposedly invincible father writhing on the stage. Dad! She screamed, frantically backing her chair away from the terrifying man with the silver hair and the lethal eyes. Miss Davison looked like she was about to completely faint, her face draining of all color as she backed into the heavy velvet curtains. Security! Miss Davison screeched hysterically, waving her arms in pure panic. Call the police. These men are violent criminals. They are attacking Mr. Albright. Dad 15. The financial titan dressed in a pristine, white three-piece suit, casually stepped forward and adjusted his expensive silk tie. I highly doubt the local police will be responding to any calls from this district today, Dad 15 said smoothly, flashing a terrifyingly charming smile that never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. You see, I just purchased the entire debt portfolio of this city's municipal government roughly 4 minutes ago. He casually inspected his manicured fingernails before continuing his devastating verbal assault. The police chief is currently sitting in my associate's office, desperately begging us not to freeze his entirely corrupt pension fund. Mr. Albright, clutching his broken finger and sweating profusely, glared up at Dad 15 with a mixture of agony and disbelief. You are bluffing. Mr. Albright hissed through his teeth, trying desperately to salvage his shattered authority. I am Robert Albright. I own half the commercial real estate in this city. You cannot intimidate me with your ridiculous lies. The professor chuckled. A dry, completely humorless sound that sent violent shivers down my spine. Robert Albright. The professor mused aloud, tapping a few buttons on his holographic tablet with elegant, practiced precision. CEO of Albright Developments. A highly leveraged, entirely pathetic enterprise built on subprime loans and illegal zoning bribes. The professor looked down at the pathetic man, his wire-rimmed glasses reflecting the harsh glare of the stage lights. It appears you just missed a massive margin call on your offshore accounts about 30 seconds ago. Mr. Albright's eyes widened in genuine, unadulterated terror as his own customized smartphone began to ring frantically in his suit pocket. He fumbled with his good hand, pulling out the phone and staring at the caller ID with growing horror. It was his chief financial officer. Answer it, Arthur commanded quietly, his dark eyes boring into Mr. Albright's completely shattered soul. Mr. Albright shakily swiped the screen, putting the phone to his ear with trembling fingers. Sir, we are completely ruined. The frantic, hysterical voice of the CFO bled loudly through the phone's speaker, easily audible in the dead silence of the auditorium. Every single one of our primary banking partners just simultaneously called in our massive loans. Our stock price just completely plummeted to zero. And the federal regulatory authorities are raiding the main lobby right now. The phone slipped from Mr. Albright's entirely numb fingers, clattering loudly onto the wooden floor next to his polished shoes. He stared blankly into the distance. His entire empire, his wealth, his arrogance, entirely annihilated in less than 3 minutes. You, Mr. Albright whispered in absolute shock, looking up at the impeccably dressed men standing around him like avenging gods. Who are you people? Arthur finally stood up from his kneeling position beside me, slowly turning to face the ruined, sniveling men. We are Stella's fathers, Arthur stated simply, the terrifying weight of his true identity pressing down on the entire room like a physical, suffocating force. And you made a catastrophic mistake when you decided to make her cry. I watched all of this unfold from the floor, my mind entirely incapable of processing the sheer impossibility of the situation. These were my dads. The men I thought were petty criminals, outlaws constantly hiding from the local authorities. Yet they were currently standing on a high school stage, completely dismantling a multimillionaire's life with a few casual phone calls and entirely zero fear of the law. Dad? I croaked out, my throat completely dry and aching. Are you not afraid of the police? Arthur turned back to me, the terrifying aura instantly vanishing from his face, entirely replaced by a gentle, overwhelming affection. He reached down and gently pulled me up from the unforgiving floor, wrapping his massive, warm arms around my trembling shoulders. Oh, my sweet, foolishly brave little girl, Arthur murmured into my hair, pulling me tightly against his broad, completely secure chest. Did you really think we were hiding from the police all these years? Dad 78, the casino emperor, stepped forward with a booming, affectionate laugh, entirely ignoring the terrified audience of students. Stella, darling, we own the police. We own the banks. We own the very ground this ridiculous school is built upon. He gently patted my head, his heavy gold rings gleaming brightly under the harsh stage lights. We only kept a low profile because we wanted you to have a normal, quiet childhood away from the absolute madness of our actual lives. My mouth fell slightly open, the realization slowly crashing over me like a massive, overwhelming tidal wave. The ketchup stains, I mumbled, looking up at Arthur's perfectly clean, incredibly expensive suit. When you came home covered in blood, you said you were in a gang fight. Blade scoffed loudly from his position near the ruined Mr. Albright. Gang fight? Blade repeated with complete and utter disdain. Arthur was single-handedly dismantling an international terrorist cell that was attempting to steal military-grade uranium. The professor nodded sagely, adjusting his tablet once more. And when I told you I was running from the authorities regarding my unauthorized basement experiments, I was actually testing a highly classified kinetic defense system for the Department of Defense. He smiled gently at me. We just did not want you to worry about global security protocols while you were trying to finish your middle school algebra homework. A profound, hysterical mixture of immense relief and overwhelming exhaustion suddenly washed over me, completely draining the last reserves of my strength. I had spent my entire life walking on fragile eggshells, constantly terrified that my beloved family would be suddenly ripped away from me. I had willingly bowed to my absolute tormentor, fully prepared to sacrifice my own dignity just to keep them safely in the shadows. And they were the shadows. They were the absolute masters of the incredibly dark, powerful world they inhabited. Untouchable and utterly invincible. Miss Davison, realizing she had entirely hitched her wagon to a completely destroyed horse, suddenly fell to her knees, clasping her hands together in a desperate plea. Please, gentlemen, please forgive me, she wailed pitifully, the thick makeup on her face running wildly with her terrified, insincere tears. I was completely misled by Mr. Albright. He practically forced me to treat Stella this way. She is actually my most favorite, most brilliant student. Dad 93. The elite medical surgeon who I previously thought was just an illegal back-alley doctor, stepped forward and looked down at her with absolute disgust. Your vocal cords vibrate with such a sickening frequency of deceit that it actually offends my highly trained medical sensibilities, Dad 93 stated coldly, pulling out a sleek, sterling silver pen and clicking it ominously. As of this precise moment, you are entirely blacklisted from every educational institution, private tutoring service, and corporate training program on this planet. He smiled a completely terrifying, sterile smile. Enjoy your entirely new career in the fast food industry, assuming they are willing to hire someone with zero credible references. Tiffany, finally realizing that her reign of terror was completely and utterly over, burst into noisy, genuinely terrified sobs. She desperately tried to crawl away from the center of the stage, her fake ankle injury entirely forgotten as she moved with remarkable speed. Wait! My voice, previously so tiny and frightened, suddenly cut clearly through the chaotic noise of the auditorium. Arthur instantly stopped stroking my hair, his dark eyes snapping to my face with intense, immediate focus. What is it, sweetheart? Arthur asked softly, entirely ready to destroy whatever was left of the room if I simply asked him to. I slowly pulled myself out of his comforting embrace, my legs still trembling slightly, but my spine finally straightening with a newfound, invincible strength. I walked over to where Tiffany was cowering on the floor, her expensive clothes completely rumpled, her face a messy mask of pure terror. I looked down at her, no longer seeing a powerful, untouchable bully, but exactly what she truly was. A pathetic, hollow, highly insecure girl who desperately needed to tear others down just to feel a fleeting sense of worth. You wanted me to apologize, I said quietly, my voice perfectly steady and clear, echoing effortlessly through the silent, watching crowd of students. You wanted me to bow 100 times for something I never did. Tiffany scrambled violently backward, pressing her back against the legs of her completely ruined, hyperventilating father. I am sorry, she shrieked hysterically, completely abandoning her queen bee persona. I lied. I poured the water on myself. I ripped my own clothes. Please do not let them kill me. I stared at her, feeling absolutely no sympathy, only a profound, incredibly deep sense of finality. I do not want your apology, I told her simply, turning away from her pathetic, sobbing form. I just want you to remember this exact moment for the rest of your entirely miserable life, knowing that you will never, ever have the power to hurt me again. I walked back toward my completely awe-inspiring array of incredibly dangerous, intensely loving fathers. Arthur held out his hand, his eyes shining with a profound, overwhelming pride that completely washed away the lingering pain of the morning. "Are we finished here, Stella?" Arthur asked, his voice entirely soft and exclusively focused on me. I nodded, firmly placing my small hand into his massive, incredibly warm palm. "Yes, Dad." I smiled, a genuine, completely unburdened smile breaking across my face for the first time in entirely too long. "Let us go home." Arthur turned toward the sea of terrified students and incredibly silent faculty members. "We are leaving," Arthur announced, his voice booming with the absolute, unquestionable authority of a true king. "If anyone ever speaks a single negative word about my daughter again, I will personally ensure that this entire city is wiped entirely from the map." The threat hung heavily in the air. An incredibly solid, terrifying promise that nobody in the room dared to even slightly doubt. With perfectly synchronized, sweeping motions, the immense phalanx of elite men turned entirely around. They formed an incredibly tight, utterly impenetrable protective circle around me, shielding me completely from the prying eyes of the world. As we walked majestically back down the center aisle, the students practically pressed themselves entirely flat against the walls to grant us maximum space. We stepped out of the completely shattered double doors and out into the bright, brilliant sunshine of the school courtyard. Waiting completely silently on the pristine green lawn was a fleet of heavily armored, entirely matte black tactical helicopters, their rotors slicing the air with a deafening, powerful rhythm. Surrounding the helicopters were dozens of perfectly identical, bulletproof luxury SUVs, their engines purring with immense, suppressed power. "You guys actually brought helicopters?" I asked in absolute disbelief, staring at the completely absurd display of limitless wealth and entirely unchecked military might. "Dad 66. The brilliant professor casually patted my shoulder as we walked toward the heavily fortified lead chopper. Traffic in the financial district was completely terrible this morning. "Sweetheart," he explained entirely casually, as if commandeering military-grade aircraft was a perfectly normal solution to a morning commute. "Besides, we wanted to ensure we arrived precisely on time for your incredibly important event." I let out a sudden, entirely uncontrollable laugh, the remaining tension finally bleeding completely out of my exhausted muscles. Arthur easily lifted me up and placed me into the incredibly plush, cream-colored leather seat of the luxurious helicopter. He climbed in entirely smoothly right after me, effortlessly buckling his own heavily reinforced 5-point harness. "So, little star," Arthur said, entirely dropping his terrifying mob boss persona and smiling at me with pure, unadulterated fatherly love. "Now that you entirely know we are not highly wanted fugitives constantly running from the local police." He leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes twinkling with a brilliant, highly amused light. "Do you think you might finally start using those black titanium credit cards we gave you?" I looked completely around the incredibly advanced cabin, seeing Blade expertly checking his entirely illegal assault rifles, the professor completely hacking a foreign government server, and Dad 15 happily watching Mr. Albright's completely ruined stock portfolio crash to zero. I leaned entirely back into the luxurious, soft leather seat, finally feeling completely safe, entirely protected, and overwhelmingly loved. "Maybe." I smiled entirely warmly, looking out the reinforced window as we powerfully lifted off the ground, entirely leaving the miserable school far behind. "But I am going to entirely hold you all completely accountable for those ketchup lies." Arthur threw his massive head back and laughed entirely joyously, the completely wonderful sound entirely drowning out the powerful roar of the helicopter engines. "Fair enough, my fiercely brave girl," he promised completely, wrapping his massive arm tightly around me as we powerfully ascended into the brilliant, boundless sky. "Fair entirely enough."